Welcome to the Ralph Bivens Project, where we discuss interesting trends, places, and projects with insightful guests. Thanks for listening, and be sure to check out realtynewsreport.com. Welcome. This is the Ralph Bivens Project. I'm Ralph Bivens. I'm here today with Sam Scott, who's director of CommGate, which, of course, is the commercial gateway and part of the Houston Association of Realtors, and he's director of information and commercial services there. And we just talking to him about what's going on here in March of 2025, man. So we're rolling along through this year. Hey, Sam.
Hey, good morning, Ralph. Thanks for having me on. It's great to be here with you on a beautiful Friday morning in Houston, Texas.
Yeah, it is nice weather. I guess but before we get started, we're going to talk about a big event coming up in just a second. I just a lot of interesting stuff's been happening within the last few days, and I think everybody around the country should know that Texas Tower, new 1 million square foot tower built by Hines in downtown Houston. It's opened a couple of years ago, but it has reached 99% occupancy. And when in this kind of market, coming out of the COVID with remote work happening and companies downsizing their space, occupancy everywhere, to have a new building coming up and hit 99% occupancy in Houston is a pretty amazing thing, and it's a hopeful sign that we're maybe left some of the remnants of pandemic and how COVID hurt the office market, and there are more people coming back to work, and they want to come back to work, and Class A property. It proved up the thing, which for a while I thought the flight to quality, right? That sounded like salesman talk. But no, I think having a new building with all the bells and whistles and amenities and great design, et cetera, that make a place people want to come to work. The flight to quality is for real, and this building, brand new, leasing up this fast, all the way to 99%, it kind of proves up flight to quality is for real.
Well, it's not just quality; it's all the amenity package that comes with it. I mean, that used to just talk about a Class A, B, or a C building, but now when you're talking about a Class A building, there's sort of Class A, and then there's 5-star Class A. And it is, it's much more than just a space for people to work. There's sort of a whole, lifestyle that goes with that in terms of having, the workout facilities, accessibility to childcare, the dry cleaning and other routine things, a nice food hall nearby, floor to ceiling glass, air conditioning running the floor, higher ceilings. These are the things, when you look at the lease rates and really talk to tenants that are taking that space, they really aren't thinking of it anymore in terms of price per square foot. They really are allocating it out more now towards, cost per employee, and really just look at it as a cost that's involved in terms of recruiting and retaining the best and brightest. And if you look at who the tenants are that are moving into the Texas Tower, I mean, again, you see a lot of law firms, energy firms, people that are really trying to recruit to the best and brightest. So these buildings are not just a workplace. I mean, they really are, emblematic of a company's culture in terms of their ability to really recruit and retain, top talent.
You want people to come back to work, and they don't want to work from home, and just that tension between those two things, that people want to work from home, and you got to make them want to come into the office so they can collaborate and you can have an actual workplace again.
Well, and then again, daytime demographics still haven't recovered. I mean, it's great that Texas Tower is 100% leased, but on any given Monday or Friday, how many people are actually in the building? Not as many as would have been in that building back in 2019. So we still have got a ways to go, and I don't know that we're ever really going to see that kind of vibrant, everybody in the office, type atmosphere that downtown, used to have. And certainly the merchants down in the tunnel and the, people running restaurants and bars, not as many company happy hours after work. And again, you kind of have a thing now where if you really look at downtown demographics, it's Tuesday through Thursday, your big days, and that, a lot of people are still kind of on they're not, really being required to be in the office 5 days a week from, 9 to 5. That, it's a lot of places are kind of 2 or 3 days a week or on an as needed basis for their teams. And a lot of the new leases that are getting signed are, maybe 20 or 30% smaller than the space that they're giving up. So, I mean, we don't have our first quarter numbers firmed up yet for 2025, but 2024 did end with, still having negative absorption, for the year in the office. And so, that's still sobering. In fact, I mean, one of the things that we're working on right now with our research team is, again, typically you had class A, B, C buildings. We actually are beginning to designate some buildings with a class F, which stands for functionally obsolete. And that just, having a really old empty office building left over from the 60s or early 70s is, kind of throwing off the stats in certain areas. And the buildings are empty and they're, probably not worth the money to try to bring them up to, modern specifications. And so they're just sort of mothballed, and it'd be interesting to see if there's some sort of adaptive reuse or if they're just demolished or maybe turned into storage. Trade schools have picked up some of the slack, that if there's enough parking, that you can have a nursing academy or, something of that sort, that, is, really using them for, trade school purposes. I don't know, it's interesting to see what's going to happen to, just a lot of that empty space. It's somewhat, reminiscent of, where Houston was back in the mid 80s. But at least, again, Texas Tower is a great success story that, there still is, demand for
there's demand
very nice office space in some of our key employment centers.
Yeah, and we'll find out sooner or later what's going to happen with the Class F. That's hopefully, when everybody goes, hey, well, they can be converted to housing, and that may happen someday, some places, but it's not enough to take care of all the emptiness we've got in the market. And but the big event. Tell us what you've got planned.
Okay, this is sort of our late spring, May 15th at the Houston Country Club. We're going to have our development showcase, and so we're recruiting, inviting some of Houston's most dynamic developers to come present information about their projects. We're still firming up our list. Not quite ready to put that out yet, but it skews heavily towards industrial developers and retail developers. That maybe even to the extent that some of that stuff is adjacent to or pertinent to some of the new master plan communities that are getting rolled out in Houston exurbs. But again, essentially, developers are to be celebrated. They're the people who bring the product to market, create the opportunities for brokers. Again, our organization, CommGate, is primarily dedicated to the transactional brokerage professionals that really make the transactions happen. But again, every transaction really starts with a property, and finding that highest and best use for it. And that is what developers do, and really making sure that the brokerage community becomes acquainted with those developers, their projects, and knows when those opportunities are coming on is really one of the key things, that we do. And so we're really looking forward to getting the brokerage community together with the development community to take a look at some of these new projects. And that's going to be from 4:30 to 7 o'clock at the Houston Country Club over in the old original ballroom, the big oval ballroom with the adjacent foyer as well. So
May 15th. If people want to come, how do they register? How do they How do
go to
people?
CommGate.com, and there's a registration link right on the front page. Again, for CommGate members and for members of the SIOR chapter and the local CCIM Houston Gulf Coast chapter, there is no charge for admittance. Anyone can come. It's a $50 ticket, and again, that does include food and beverage. Have some nice hospitality going on. HAR members, get a 50% discount. And so we're really focused more about participation. This is not a fundraiser. This is really a member benefit. To really thank our members for the success that we've enjoyed, and we look forward to seeing our folks. I mean, particularly.
Mark your calendar, May 15th, I'm going to be there. I'm going to be one of the participants there. I'm going to have a little booth there, and all my old friends I haven't seen you in a while, stop by, say hi. I'd like to see you. And we don't get out as much as we did before the pandemic, so this is a good time to get out and shake hands and say hello, like the olden days. So I'm looking forward to seeing
I'm
friends.
a big believer in the Bivens communications platform, that you have the longest reach into Houston's commercial real estate marketplace of any media outlet. I've done some of my own informal polling, and more than any other media channel, Houston's brokerage community tunes into Bivens, the Realty News Report. So this is a chance for our members to read your newsletter at the beginning of every week, and really pay attention to your press releases, and want to get a mention for their projects and transactions on your blog. This is a chance for them to meet the man, the myth, the legend. So again, you're one of our big draws.
Yeah, it's fantastic. It's going to be fun. It's going to be a blast. So but I encourage everybody to mark that on their calendar and stop by. And now, if you're kind of new to town, you haven't heard of CommGate. There's a lot of listings there, right? Tell us a little bit about CommGate.
Well, CommGate was founded, back in the year 2001 by our then, HAR chairman, Todd Mason. And, he was just wondering at the time, why is it that a residential professional, could, get a requirement, a request from a would-be home buyer, like, hey, I'm looking for a 4-bedroom, 2.5-bath house, and, this neighborhood, or that goes to that school, and, what can you find for me? And that, in less than 5 minutes, Realtor could go to the MLS system, pose that query, generate a report, generate a map, and send it to their client. Whereas, commercial professionals at the time would take down that requirement and then start pawing through, a rack of PDF flyers, typically arranged by key map, page, and grid, and then transcribing that information into an Excel spreadsheet and calling brokers to see if there was an update on, the amount of available space or the list price. And so it was really solving that problem, about getting the availability in one place. Now, certainly there are other firms that do that, but again, part of our philosophy of why we exist is that we are a commercial broker association. We are founded and owned by the brokerage community, and that the brokerage community ought to be able to come together and cooperate, to organize its available properties and share them with each other. And so that is our founding principle, that we are about the brokerage community cooperating. And really, we've been blessed to do this in Houston, which really has one of the most congenial, cooperative brokerage communities of anywhere in the country.
That's true.
And again, we've gone through some different technology providers over the years. We relaunched the service in 2018 with a company called Catalyst, which is now owned by Moody's Analytics. And Moody's has brought a great deal of information, to the platform. And we also are now functioning on a national platform, that when one of our members logs into CommGate, they're able to search researched properties, in Austin, San Antonio, Dallas, Fort Worth. Their brokerage associations, commercial broker associations, say in Lubbock, Tyler, El Paso, down in the Rio Grande Valley, that are also contributing information to this platform, that across all 50 states. Moody's is working with researchers and research organizations, like the Association of Industrial Realtors, or AIR out in Los Angeles, the Commercial Brokers Association, or CEBA, up in the Seattle area, as well as like statewide commercial overlay realtor boards up throughout the Midwest, Wisconsin, Minnesota, Georgia, Louisiana has a statewide overlay board, LACDB. So all of that data is put into the Moody's platform. So when our members log in, they are able to research and generate reports, not only on the Houston area, but really on every metro area, throughout the U.S. And this is not just information that's being, added by brokers, although there certainly is broker uploaded and added information. But we also, like, just even within here at HAR and CommGate, we have a staff of 7 people, 3 customer service, 3 dedicated to, and 4 dedicated to research. And so we're, assisting our members, updating their inventories, and then also reaching out for office and industrial properties, identifying the landlord reps that even if they're not members of CommGate, we're still contacting them, getting their information and keeping it current. And, our information, 90% of our information has been confirmed and validated within the last 90 days. So we really have a focus on keeping our data fresh, that
makes a difference.
Yeah. Well, the worst thing that can happen is to actually have a client, of a broker, be looking online, find what they think is the perfect building, the perfect space they fall in love with, and then go to their broker and say, hey, here's the building I want to buy. And then discover, like, oh, well, that sold a year ago. That we just cannot, have that. So again, we definitely work hard with our members that data is either kept fresh or it is removed from the system if we cannot get confirmation or verification on that information. And of course, one of the things we really try to do as well is focus on, completed transactions, that when something is marked as sold or leased in our system, our research team follows up with the brokers involved. And of course, Texas is a non-disclosure state. So, we get some confirmed sale prices, we get some confirmed lease rates and lease terms, but at the very least, we're going to know that a transaction took place. We're going to know what property was the subject of that transaction, and then, who was the broker representing, the landlord or the seller, and then also try to get information on who was representing the buyer and the tenant so that people can follow up. Like, really, just even over the last 5 years, we have 30,000 sale records that we've compiled. 12,000 have a price on there. Some of the prices are estimates. Some of them are confirmed, by, the selling party. Some are confirmed, by a third party, like an appraiser. So we got, again, 12,000 prices. We've got, I guess, 9,800 confirmed sold prices. And again, you can, if you want to search, if a member wants to search our database, they're a box they can check so that you only want to see, comps, comparable sales or leases that have confirmed transaction details. That's an option that you can have. But again, so that's really kind of the way people are using our system. I mean, there's the ability to search active available inventory or look at transactions. And again, Moody's has brought, a lot of information. There's a pro version of CommGate that costs a little more, but that has all of the Moody's data in it, for being able to look up, outstanding loan balances, financing information. And so it's really very powerful.
Now, if you're a member and you have something for sale and you want to, can you put your listing on the CommGate?
Yes. Again, we accept that information. Again, people can email it into research@commgate.com and we'll put it in. Now, only our members listing get displayed on the public search at commgate.com. And then also that information is syndicated to the Moody's National portal, for public display as well, which is
That's right.
moodyscre.com.
So if you're a member, you list, and but it seems like that's quite a feature to be able. Hey, I'm a member. I put my listing online, and brokers around the country can see it.
Well, absolutely. I mean, really, one of the main reasons that every broker has a principal that they're working for. The seller that's hired and retained them to help sell their property. The landlord that's hired them to help lease their building, lease their property, and it's important that principal be able to go online, because the broker, essentially, to get the listing, makes a set of promises about how they're going to market that property and use their network, use maximum exposure. And so those principals want to be able to go on the internet and see that listing. And so that's really one of the main values that we deliver, is being able to reassure that principal that yes, your property is out there. And certainly there are several other services that that deliver that that service as well. And so we really strive hard to make sure that we're prominent. Again, we do have a link off of har.com, which is the dominant residential portal, and certainly performs well on the search engines. And being the commercial link off har.com provides a great deal of exposure, and we're certainly looking at and exploring ways that we can continue to enhance that. That is probably one of the biggest questions that we're asked, when a lot of people are joining, is like, hey, is my listing going to be up on har.com? And right now it's like, well, we're linked off har.com, but certainly that's something that we're studying. Again, making listings more prominent, easier to find. Certainly as we kind of go from an era of search engine dominance to to AI and AI agents, being the oracle that people are consulting, for navigating the internet, having heightened exposure to AI agents is something that is probably going to be very much part of our plan as we work our way through 2025.
har.com is how many clicks do they get, hits, or what clicks do they get a month? They got a lot of people viewing that thing.
Yeah, it's tens of millions of detailed views. You try to break it down by unique users. Again, I really wasn't prepared to cover all the HAR stats, but it's
huge.
It's freaking huge. It's got so big, it's got its own weather system. It's again, we're Houston. We monitor our traffic, and again, all of our listings that we syndicate out, to other portals, be it Realtor.com, Zillow, Redfin, Homes.com, HAR.com out traffics all of them. In fact, this is the only major market where Zillow is not the number one portal. And,
okay.
So
that's amazing. Yeah. Well, I remember, years ago in the 90s, internet was kind of new, and it was new, not kind of new, it was new. And HAR announced that we've got a website and we're going to put our listings online. That was a news story, that was making news all over the country. You guys were the first one to do that, of all the realtor associations in the United States. They go, wow, how can they do that? But it really worked, and that was,
it was still kind of a
95, or something. I think it was 95 or 96, something like that.
It was 97, I think, is when the site first went live, and I wasn't working for HAR at the time. I actually came to HAR in 1999. And that spring of 99, that was also the used to have a sign out in front of the building that said, Houston Association of Realtors, and kind of had the old NAR logo of the big block R up there. And it was in early 1999 that we decided like, hey, we've got this big pylon sign on the Southwest Freeway, let's just promote har.com. And so they changed the pylon sign out front of the building to be from the, designating the Realtor Association to just har.com, having that logo up there. And we went from
get drive-by traffic on that sign. It's busiest.
Get some good traffic, but yeah, we went from our stats on that. We've been doing about 15,000 user sessions per month on har.com, and in the month following, that sign being changed, it went to over 15,000 per day. So it's like a 30-fold increase in traffic based on one sign, and I was kind of like, okay, outdoor advertising really does work, and that's certainly one reason that HAR has always embraced, the billboard. I know that, there's some in our industry who think that, billboards are a blight and should be, taken down across all the freeways, and think that it's, not a great thing that HAR spends money with the billboard industry promoting our site, but at the same time, delivering traffic to listings is
major eyeballs.
And again, we do have a CommGate billboard, out there as part of the mix as well. But maybe we need to dial that up as well. But we always have embraced outdoor advertising, just because that was the initial springboard that kind of put us into orbit, back in '99.
Yeah, you were ahead of the pack by a long shot. And
well, I'll tell you, it's you kind of feel sorry for people that are trying to launch websites and web portals today, that it's just so much more difficult to try to get mind share. I mean, just really looking at the team at homes.com, they're spending $1 billion a year promoting, their website. And of course, it's sort of a family of websites, but they still are working to try to take market share from the established portals. And,
they took out ads on the Super Bowl. I think they had several ads during
multiple ads. Yeah, and got Saturday Night Live cast member and the Schitt's Creek guy, and celebrity spokespeople. It is again a very impressive ad campaign. It's going to be interesting to see what Rocket does now that they've acquired Redfin. They're integrating that. So
tons of shakeout in the residential field of online marketing and listings. It's but hey, that's the way it's all. If there's a lot of change, it always.
Well, yeah. Well, again, I guess actually the first real estate company that went online was launched here in Houston as well. I mean, this is turning into a bit of a reminiscence, but yeah, eRealty, Russ Capper's firm that was launched here in Houston. That was the very first, and it was, they introduced the whole concept of internet data exchange, or IDX policies, and again, there were some markets like Austin actually filed a lawsuit and tried to get an injunction against them. And
I forgot.
Actually, eRealty won the lawsuit, and they could have very easily owned the Austin Board of Realtors for their anti-competitive behaviors. But in the end, Russ and them were nice guys, and they just wanted a chance to compete. So
I remember Beth Wolf. She launched a website. Long time. I mean, one of the first companies to just, hey, I've got a website, and here's the name of my agent, so you can click there or whatever. It's very primitive, but she was out front with getting that formed and was really proud of it. And back then, wow, a company created a website. That's a story.
Well, just being able to get a good domain was think back to the '90s. I mean, people could just go to their internet domain registration service and just click in the thing, say, gee, is this available? And again, har.com was available in '96 when Bob Hale and our then technology director, Stone Craig, went to register a domain, and were able to get a nice 3-letter domain that, those have all been snapped up. I know that Stuart Title had a subsidiary that was focused on doing a lot of GIS, mapping and programming, and some of the guys were big golfers, and they had an idea for a kind of a GIS, be able to look up golf courses. And one of them was just noodling around on the internet one afternoon and registered the domain golf.com.
Oh, whoa.
And
Oh man. Hey,
you get like just hey, just hanging out in the afternoon around the office and just checking and say, like, hey, nobody's registered golf.com. So they actually wound up selling that to Jeff Maggart's team golf for $250,000 and thought they had robbed a bank. Like, wow, we sold that domain for $250,000, and then Maggart's golf holding company, Team Golf, turned around and leased it to NBC Sports for $2 million a year.
oh,
So that's sort of early days of the internet. We just didn't know, the Stewart team didn't realize what they had. To sell it for $250,000, and then Jeff getting $2 million a year for it.
I know. Well, homes.com is that's pretty basic right there. I don't know what they did to obtain that, but that's pretty major URL.
Well, homes.com is really one of the pioneers, in the space. And in fact, HAR, we put together data licensing arrangements with a number of early real estate portals, and we're actually still operating with homes.com under the terms of a license agreement that was signed in September of 1999.
Wow.
And so it's, they also are members now, and a lot of the features on their site are driven, under, MLS rules and policies for doing internet display. So,
man, I wish I just when I did realtynewsreport.com, I didn't think about it that much. I just, oh, let's just do this, So hopefully someday somebody will say, oh, that's a great site name. I want to send you $1 zillion.
Well, to a certain extent, I mean, I think we're, the whole era of internet domains being prominent is passing. I think that AI is somehow going to kind of eclipse, the browser-based, destination portals and be aggregating information in new and different ways. So, it's interesting to see, kind of where we're headed with, with real estate information. I think, regardless of how, I mean, there is a general concern out there that AI could sort of eat the MLS, could eat the CIE, could could be so aggressive in terms of how information is aggregated that having a destination portal could the value could be diminished. But at the same time, there still is that problem about having a source of truth and knowing that the data is fresh and has been maintained and curated and kept current, and that if there are commercial information services that allow brokers just to upload stuff willy-nilly that don't really follow up with people and keep stuff current, and over time they typically degrade into just a compilation of stale and bogus information that can't be relied upon. And so we really do think that a big key part of our value proposition is our research team, is our discipline around keeping information current, verified, and up to date, and removing information that isn't verified or made current. So
what about AI, artificial intelligence? How's that changing what you're doing right now, or what you're prepping for?
Well, it's really happening on two fronts. There's sort of how do we make our information, prominent, to AI agents, so that when people are interacting with their, OpenAI, ChatGPT, Gemini or Siri or any of the other, AI agents that seem to be getting traction now with the general public, we want to make sure that our information is findable and is being promoted across those platforms. But then also in terms of how we research our information and compile information about availabilities, when we're trying to keep information current, particularly about properties that are being leased, and we really focus on multi-tenant office and industrial properties over 20,000 square feet, trying to make sure that we know about everything that's happening with those properties. And so, we use AI now to monitor press releases, make sure that we spot properties when they're first proposed, when they go under construction, when they, start being made available. And then, also when we see a big leasing announcement, we're using, search engines and now increasingly AI to try to determine, okay, well, where is that tenant moving from? What building were they in? How much space had they been occupying? And try to maintain information about move in, move out in terms of calculating net absorption of office and industrial space. So, AI is becoming a much bigger tool for how we do that. And of course, we try to make sure that, we're verifying that information. Again, there is still a phenomenon of, sort of garbage in, garbage out, that, you don't want to have an AI hallucinating on you and serving up, bogus information. But nonetheless, it is really changing the way our research team, looks into transactions in terms of validating them and trying to make sure that, we're getting the whole picture for not just the fact that, hey, Texas Tower is leased up. That's great, but who are the major tenants and where did they come from? And make sure that we're keeping track of the space that's being vacated, so that we can really, again, get a picture of net absorption. So AI is becoming an important part of our research team, is I guess the short way of putting it there, and increasingly an important source of traffic, to our members' available property listings.
Yeah, it's becoming big in everything. That's.
Well, I know Moody's, they use it extensively. That they've, have offshore facilities where they take all of the, filings, with, say, the Securities and Exchange Commission and other agencies that regulate mortgage-backed securities and publicly traded corporations. And there are, specific, quarterly and annual filings that have to be made, underwriting documents that have to be made available to investors. Moody's takes that information to, these offshore, facilities and digest that information, chop it up, glean information about who are the tenants in these industrial properties that are covered by this, package of commercial mortgage-backed securities. And, there's a great deal of information, confirmed sale prices, confirmed lease terms, financing amounts, amount of debt outstanding, the loan term, things that, a more sophisticated real estate investor, or people who are, more on the lending side, and dealing in those mortgage-backed securities, rely on that level of information. That's probably, for the typical workaday broker that has, several land listings, or maybe trying to help lease out a couple of office buildings. I mean, they're not going to be as interested or as big a user of that information, but certainly commercial lenders and more sophisticated brokerage operations use that type of information when they're prospecting for investment opportunities. I mean, that they can spot a distressed property further out and realize that, okay, this company is, or this particular property is their ownership structure is about to have a problem because they've got a mortgage, a note that they're going to have to refinance, and that their property is now worth less than it was 5 years ago. And so they're going to have to do a cash in refi where they're going to have to bring a lot of money, and the money they're going to borrow is going to be at a much higher interest rate. And so, they could be entering what Jim Cramer calls the house of pain, where the, and it's unfortunate to see that. Like, I was very saddened, when, Cameron Management, lost the Esperson buildings, back to their lender, in lieu of foreclosure there, or I forget exactly the mechanism that was used, but nonetheless, basically, they, had to refinance those buildings, and just the way the financing and underwriting worked, just the dog no longer hunted, and they, wind up, losing the ownership on those buildings. But again, there are a lot of other opportunities like that across various asset classes. Certainly Houston saw several big multifamily foreclosures where people just got a little exuberant back there in 2021, 2022. Money was cheap, and they were able to, buy multifamily projects, with a lot of leverage, and and rents, didn't go up as much, and that now with the higher interest rates, it's kind of compress the cap rate there. They're having a hard time refinancing, and so letting those things go back to the bank. So there are those opportunities to be had, and certainly those the data that Moody's compiles allows people to kind of sift through and spot those opportunities.
If something's in trouble today, it might be up for sale tomorrow. It's or next year or whatever. You can keep an eye on it.
Yeah, there are some very motivated sellers out there, and again, it'll be interesting to see kind of how that plays out across the economy in general as we kind of get on into 2025. I mean, there's certainly some of the key drivers of Houston's economy are going to be undergoing some change, and it'll be interesting to see how those changes make themselves felt in the market.
As you watch and observe the new listings and things that are being posted on CommGate.com and or things that are being sold and pulled off or whatever, just the activity that you can see by looking at the listings on your website. Have you seen anything lately that you say, oh, this may be a new trend?
Well, I think one that we're just kind of watching is a medical office building, and lab space that that we are hearing, that a lot of our med center institutions are going to be reducing their staff. We saw Texas Children's went through a big round of layoffs last year, and again that was primarily tied to Medicaid eligibility. That as Texas tightened up their Medicaid eligibility requirements after some of the pandemic era subsidies that had been applied, they just weren't able, and so that resulted in them needing to close a number of Texas Children's clinics. And again, as you look at what's apparently that's a trend that's going to continue, that we're going to see diminished Medicaid spending, and there are just a lot of people who get Medicaid subsidized health care, and there's a lot of our major hospitals that were the facilities that they operated depended on that money. And so I think
and research firms, research funds, the federal funding of research on medicines or treatment or whatever, I think that's getting questionable too, how much research.
I guess there was that article that was, it was a Chronicle story, talking to Dr. Paul Klotman, who runs the Baylor College of Medicine, and he was just commenting that I guess that new TMC Helix, TMCX, the new biotechnology incubator space that they built out, and that they so everybody is very excited about the new biomedical research facilities being built over there, the old grocery supply there and adjacent to the medical center, and the old brown parking lot that now has fabulous research facilities. But again, I was NIH funded research is a lot of what had was funding those research initiatives, and something north of 50% of every NIH dollar that goes to those organizations goes to cover facilities and administration. So that's the building, that's those departments that were going to be occupying that space. If that money is not available, and if the federal government is no longer going to pay those types of, again, overhead, amounts, then, just the viability of those biomedical research enterprises. It'd be a shame if, these facilities that are built for doing, cutting edge, cancer and other types of research, developing, therapies, translating, cutting edge research into, new, therapies and treatments. If instead that space gets turned into medical office building space and they're just trying to put a dentist or a pediatrician in there, then that'll have a ripple effect throughout the medical office building community, which again is a big segment of the office building space here in Houston is for clinicians.
Yeah, the Texas Medical Center is the biggest medical center in the world. Tons of hospitals, medical schools, everything, and then these research functions and buildings that are associated with that, and those research buildings, and we kind of had a vision of the third coast there, where you've got these pharma companies and life sciences companies making the progress on the two coasts, Boston, San Diego, California. But this could be a grounding for another third coast of life science.
The tradition has typically been that you have a cutting edge breakthroughs made here in Houston, and then little companies are formed, to capitalize on that, and then they're bought up and moved to San Diego. That's kind of has been the unfortunately the history of a lot of biomedical breakthroughs in Houston is that they're wildly successful in California. After getting their start here. But again, you go back to the days of DeBakey and Cooley, having the race on some of the breakthroughs in heart surgery, resulting in transplants and artificial hearts. Certainly, Michael DeBakey, invented the MASH unit, invented the Veteran Affairs Hospital. Was one of the lead faculty members that really took Baylor College of Medicine to the next level, and in turn, the VA hospital that we have here in Houston, that's such a huge part of delivering veterans care, was really really one of the first major VA facilities, and was very much tied to Baylor because it was DeBakey and his experience, working as an Army physician, that just sort of created the category. And again, you would hope that of all the promises made to our veterans and the expansion of veterans care to address the particular needs of the veterans that are now came back from Iraq and Afghanistan and experience particular problems from everything from Agent Orange to the burn pits, that's an important clinical aspect that then has ripple effects throughout Houston's economy in terms of just the people who help maintain those facilities, act as orderlies, that it's not all just doctors in white coats. I mean, that there's people working in kitchens and making sure that medical waste is properly disposed of, and it's just a huge industry that ripples out across every community.
Just right there in the medical center, it's like 110,000 employees, and 10,000 of them have a PhD or a terminal degree, and it's just a ton of.
Well, like MD Anderson, I mean, that's like over $4 billion a year budget, for just one institution. I mean, it is kind of one of the sad things about living in Houston is that sooner or later I see a lot of distant family members and old friends and things that you get in touch with them because, oh, hey, I'm going to be spending some time in Houston. Let's get out for dinner, go do something, and unfortunately, oftentimes it's accompanying some sort of a health crisis. But again, that's just part of living in Houston is getting to see old family and friends and reconnect with people under less than ideal circumstances.
And that there's a lot of really good people and good institutions, that churches and things that provide housing for those people who are going to be here getting extended treatment, and things like that. So there's a lot of opportunity to do good to people that are suffering through cancer and all the lengthy treatment they need to go through. It's a tough road, and so we got a lot of good people that step up and pitch
Yeah,
in to help
I know
them.
there's some people that have like looked into trying to do short-term rentals with an eye towards making furnished, you know, single-family dwellings available to people who, you know, are wanting them on an extended or intermittent basis while they're getting treatment at the medical center. But quite honestly, most of those people in the end just decided to go with either long-term tenants or just, you know, sell the property in general, because there are so many apartment complexes close to the medical center, and you can rent a fully furnished apartment for, you know, not much over $2,000 a month, and be, you know, within walking distance, you know, of a hospital, and so, you know, I mean, we're blessed by the, you know, abundant amount of multifamily space, you know, both furnished and unfurnished, and that, you know, again, the whole, you know, short-term rental thing, you know, seems like that might be a bubble that's kind of popping. You know, I don't know, it's really startled to look down on Galveston Island at the number of properties for sale right now, and also to look at Airbnb and see some of the deep discounts being made on rental property down there. It's again, I think the folks are caught in a
I need
squeeze.
to check that out. You know, I used my brother-in-law used to have a place down there. You know, it's pretty cool. You know, down there on West End and the beach. You know, it's really
Yeah,
cool.
you know, my family, we always would vacation out of a Brandon rental down in the Surfside Beach, and you know, it's inevitably on like day 2 or 3, you're thinking, this is great. I want to buy a beach house. I want to do this all the time, and you know, but it sure is nice just to be able to, you know, rent it for a week or two and give the keys back and not
Yeah,
have to worry about getting windstorm insurance or something for it. and,
yeah.
and I think that
Nowadays,
I think the insurance squeeze is. You know,
oh,
the property insurance is a problem, and most property insurance, if you're down on, you know, the coast or even south of 59, it can be tough to make sure that you're getting windstorm coverage, and
oh,
you know,
yeah. That's
you
that's
know,
that's well, that's
insurance
that
is,
whole thing is that Texas Windstorms, TWIA, TWIA, Texas Windstorm Insurance Association. That kind of they're you know, I've heard some stories about them. We'll have to talk about that sometime.
well,
But
I mean, those are just the whole assumptions about what's going to constitute a 100-year flood is changing as well. And you get close to the coast now, and you know, they're modeling, you know, like, okay, the 100-year flood is a Category 5 hurricane pushing a 20-foot storm surge, and so that has some profound implications for, you know, for flood insurance if you're located at an elevation of less than 20 feet. So so yeah, and I guess that's the thing. One of the things that everybody's kind of, you know, holding their breath for, you know, as we approach the end of the month, that the Harris County and the new flood control maps, you know, the FEMA floodplain maps are supposed to be getting released. You know, have their preliminary release. I guess there still will be a public comment period before they're, you know, finally adopted. But
is
again,
that about April 1? Is that when that's expected?
right, the number, you know, people are telling me is going to be, you know, into March. So
The end of March.
so we're
It will
all,
be interesting. We've spent so much money to make these improvements to the bios and drainage and building detention ponds everywhere, and uh, I don't know if how well they've been able to calculate that, if they put that into where the line should be drawn for 100-year or 500-year or whatever. I'll be interested to see the maps.
well, again, the main point there is, I mean, there's the likelihood you're going to flood, but then there's also the issue of what is flood insurance going to cost,
Mm,
and the and the
huge.
pricing formula used to be very simple. You know, that hey, if you're in the 100-year, it was going to be, you know, 2x, and if you were deemed as being not in the 100-year floodplain, then you got a much lower rate. And but now, you know, there are a lot more shades of gray, and you know, FEMA is changing the way they price flood insurance. And there was I guess the last time they reformed the national flood insurance program, there was a thing that hey, we need to start moving towards market. You know, and so that means that that flood insurance is going to be getting more expensive. So regardless of kind of what happens to the, where the actual line of that, 100-year floodplain, zone, is drawn, I think it's going to be more expensive, for anybody who's anywhere close to, a stream, ditch, bayou, or river, let alone the coast.
Yeah, all those people, the retirees that went in Florida, that bought homes, 40 years ago or something, and now they're living, off their pensions or Social Security or whatever. And now those homes that came in when things were cheap, it's
particularly there they had the whole condominium thing where they're, even if they're in a low-rise condo, it's the condo association that's responsible for maintaining, the roof and the insurance policies, and also just the maintenance, and a lot of elderly retirees.
Surfside in Florida, the big problem they have with that tower there is that's changed the market a lot too, I think.
Yeah, I mean, deferred maintenance is one thing, but having the whole thing collapse in the middle of the night, and kill everybody that was in the part of the tower that collapsed, that's that really raises the stakes. And so I know they've passed laws there now requiring bigger maintenance funds, and there's special assessments that are just financially crippling, that a lot of the tenants just don't have the money. The market is glutted with people trying to sell their condos to get out from underneath, that debt. It'll be interesting to see how they get out of that.
Yeah, well, we got our fingers crossed. Sam Scott, CommGate, May 15th. We got it
May
down.
15th at the Houston Country Club. Go to CommGate.com. That's with 2 M's, CommGate.com. And you can hit the registration link. Again, if you are a member of CommGate, CCIM, SIOR chapter members, or get a discount as an HAR member, we'd love to see you out there. We're going to have some great developers bringing people up to speed with what's happening out in the exurbs of Houston for the most part, where there's a lot of development right now. And again, not just commercial following the rooftops, but also, big warehouse distribution facilities, manufacturing facilities that are being built, and all of the other commercial opportunities that attends all of that development, as Houston continues to spread across the prairie.
The development showcase. All right. Well, remember, it's this Ralph Bivens project, and we've got a website, realtynewsreport.com, and you can register there to get our newsletter and enjoy the other things we got. And we appreciate you guys listening. Sam, appreciate you being here, and hope to talk to you again soon.
Okay. Well, thank you so much, Ralph. I look forward to. I'll see you on May 15th.
We'll be there. Well, you betcha.
Okay. You guys take care. Bye.
Thank you.